All right, we're good to go. Thanks for coming today, everybody. We've got some great guest speakers here to speak about some of the issues we're dealing with downtown in multiple areas. I know there's a lot going on in the room today. From what I understand, this is the first time that we're streaming something live on YouTube in the city, so the cameras and stuff are here, so no one in the audience is going to be seen. But what we are trying to do is reach as many people as possible, so hopefully this will help. We're going to get things underway today with, we're going to zoom ourselves over to the city of Toronto, and I'm going to let Stephen Somerville, someone I've worked with in the past in the hospitality and event management business, kind of give a little introduction of who he is, and we'll get things underway. Again, thank you everyone for coming today. Let's get started.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Councillor. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. My name is Steve Somerville. I'm the president and the owner of a training company based out of Toronto. It's called Stay Safe Instructional Programs. To give you a quick snapshot of myself over the last 45 years, I retired as a police staff sergeant with the Toronto Police Service, 25 years of service. And for about the last 20 years, I have been a security consultant for a number of live events. Initially, when I left policing, I went to a national broadcaster. And one thing that we're going to hone in here on today is some of the experiences, some of the avenues that I've been able to give them the opportunity to apply my trade. I'm going to be talking today. I have a presentation for you. I'm going to start off with a bit of a presentation I just did recently, actually, at Canadian Special Events Live, based out of Toronto. And that particular day, we had well over 100 event planners gathered to talk about some of the issues, some of the considerations, and certainly some of the concerns with hosting and running live events, retaining or procuring security, if you will, to speak live events. And when I spoke to Councillor Agostino, we were speaking about some of the concerns and some of the pitfalls and some of the considerations that we have with respect to perhaps either training security or training staff or training people within the hospitality industry and district to be able to give us a good sense of some of the expectations, some of the pros, some of the cons, and unfortunately at times, some of the circumstances that we might experience ourselves or expose ourselves to areas of judgment. So with your blessing, Councillor, I'd like to jump into the presentation that I prepared for today. And as I mentioned, I'm going to start off with a presentation that I had the opportunity to do recently on stage here at Canadian Special Events Live. And what we're going to jump right into is talking about some of the things that can go awry, some of the areas, some of the problems or difficulties that we can have. And the first thing I'm going to speak about is a particular group. I actually had identified them as one of my clients. So they're called the OTLA, and that represents the Ontario Trial Lawyers Association. These are plaintiff lawyers. So speaking to this particular group about some of those considerations, and why don't we jump right in? It's a group that I hope you never deal with, and they are called the OTLA, and that's the Ontario Trial Lawyers Association. These are plaintiff lawyers. These are people that look at incidents, take a look at situations that got awry, and you'll read some of your name or the name of your company on what's called a statement of claim. Well, there's a lawsuit. There's a lawsuit going. And what you're seeing on the screen right now is a definition that is being prescribed to me by the OTLA to about risk. How is risk calculated? What is looked at to identify risk? And anytime people do come together and there's events, we need to take a look at the vulnerability of a venue and the vulnerability of an event and things that can go awry. And I'm talking about everything from access and egress control to signing in to anytime alcohol beverages are served. And we get into the threshold of sobriety and we have perhaps demonstrations and we have issues going on, and the harm and the type of harm that can come to an organization. And this often is what gets the eye, if you will, of any sort of law firm, certainly in this province, if not this country. And there's two systems I would offer for your consideration to view, please. Number one is, how do we manage events proactively and reactively? How do we respond to a situation where there is clean up on all five, there's breakage, there's a slippery floor, or there's something that's gone awry, and it's how we monitor, how we evaluate, how we kind of identify what risk is. And often I would offer in your world, we need to educate people, educate clients who may not know what they don't know, which you take for granted and you do. And we want to take reasonable steps to manage foreseeable risk. And there's an old adage, an old saying, if you can predict it, well, you can prevent it as well.
And there again, due to time restraints, real quickly, show you an incident that occurred back in August of 2022. Here's the speaker. You're probably familiar with the speaker, Salman Rushdie. And I'm not getting into any of the political issues, but we had a speaker there where arguably there was a lot of critics, a lot of skeptics. Can I share with you, it was a tragic incident. And unfortunately, a person attacked Mr. Rushdie. It was a VIP wearing a lanyard. He came onto the stage and within a short period of time, stabbed him numerous times. There was no security working that event. And who came to Mr. Rushdie's aid were people in the audience and back of house, stage manager. Let's take a look. Speaking with breaking news, author Salman Rushdie has been attacked and stabbed on stage at an event in Western New York. According to the Associated Press, the author was walking onto a stage in Chautauqua. This is aftermath of what happened. This is in New York, in Western New York. Another man attacked the author. Rushdie, best known for his book, The Satanic Verses, which sparked many death threats over the years, including a bounty of over $3 million. Rushdie spent years in hiding. The man involved in today's attack was taken into custody. Bringing updates as soon as we learn more. So that's just a brief video clip of tragedy that perhaps could be mitigated or prevented, and the systems in place, the operational plan, the safety plan, what the events plan and schedule and expectations were or not, and how we manage that. Those are some of the issues with regards to the issues of common source of litigation. Let's take a look at some of those are some of the things that I do currently for a living. Number one is obviously failure or breaches of legislation. Most commonly would be smart serve or breaches to Liquor License Act. Huge issue of litigation in this industry. We serve beverages, we provide beverages, we sell beverages, whichever the case might be. And would you find folks who agree that the more people drink, the more special they can become? Have we ever dealt with special people or special clients? Right? And so many of the issues, especially with the legislation, associated with smart serve, failure to comply with legislation. I don't want to assume, I don't want to presume, but we also need to educate all of our people, all of our clients into the areas of the occupier liability. Working here, working as a gig, receiving some form of compensation, you could be named as an occupier. You could be held accountable. Issues of the Liquor License Act and breaches with occupational health and safety, and someone might be injured. Also, failures to identify risk, recognize risk. And I'm talking about just an overall event safety plan. Help people get in, help people get out, how we go to acquire a parking lot at the end of the day, whatever the case might be. And the other thing I'm going to look at is security presence and the type of security presence that we have retained, and we put out some form of procurement process for. And I'm not getting into a sales pitch, smoke and mirrors, offering you the best security provision that we have, ABC security, whatever the case might be. I try to look at a little bit more of a common recognized standard. And I would highly suggest you guys check out what's called the PSISA. That's the Public Services Health and Safety Association, also licensing provisions of this industry. And probably something along the lines of being worse than security provisions, ineffective security response. People did nothing, were able to respond as a result of something went wrong, something went awry. We also need to take a look at all issues associated with patron safety, guest safety, and staff injury. The Occupier Liability Act, I'm going to give you a real quick overview of that. Basically talks about what an occupier includes. And that's any person who's a possession of property or a person that's being hired to work and act on it. And under occupier liability, anytime a person, even similar to the brickworks, is brought into this venue, there's a reasonable expectation of that person's safety. And when something goes awry, you might be put to the test to say, well, how is this safety somewhat prescribed? How is it anticipated? And what steps did you take, if any, were reasonable within the circumstances? You've got to control access and egress and what people do within a premise. And usually with the event planners that I've had the experience to work with, is that's a part of the operational security plan. Because the duties is what's called a duty of care. And heaven forbid, or whatever your police system would be, if there is a statement of claim or allegations of negligence, usually this is one of the first breaches. You breach your duty of care component. In an operational event plan, there was inappropriate measures taken place to talk about people's safety. Have you ever worked an event where somebody had to be removed, ejected? And the ejection protocols, how do we get a person out safely? And what happens to the person once they are put to the front of the entrance or the rear of an entrance? Is there a requirement to get them home safely? And what are those reasonable steps? What do they require? We also need to take a look at that concept of duty of care, and that's the standard of conduct. Where there's a fight, where there's an altercation, and who breaks it up? Who is summoned to it? What is the expectation? What's the threshold of what's reasonable or what's not? And any time a human being, any time the patron, I guess, is struck or there's some form of use of force application, and we don't need to look at social media, what's going on in the news in a particular day, that becomes front page news. And this issue of duty of care is awfully extremely contentious situation. And any time a person can be exposed to injury, well, that unfortunately exposes us, including the event planners, to potential accountability. And there again, that threshold, of course, to take legislation, salvation, health and safety, stuff, and working within a premise or working within a site where violence could be exposed to violent encounters. And it means that we can be from jail, more people come together, whether alcohol is served or not, whether fees are charged to get or not when people are invited, is are we providing a reasonable level of safety and the provisions associated with occupational health and safety that should be on, likely, an event planner's checklist to make sure that those areas are indeed being considered. There's legal obligations from the lawyer, from the purposes of an employer, and we need to train people. We need to make people be aware reasonably of risk and what that might entail. And there's these areas here of breaches of legislation where the legal duty to inform, to educate, and tell people what they can do, what they shouldn't do. And if you feel you're at risk, you have a right to back off. You have a right to remove yourself from that. I'm just stating on there some of the legal authorities, just as a point of reference, of course. But we also need to, any occupation or any venues, we also need to take through the training educational programs. Is there a program right now, in my humble view, certainly in this nation, the biggest program that we should have people working here as staff and people working behind, bars and whatnot, is how to calm people down. To de-escalate people, what to say to not rile people up, what to say to calm people down. And just a quick show of hands here, please. It's not a test, and we're not recording you. But who here has ever said something in an event or had to say something in an event that's actually worked and calmed somebody down? Really, kudos. That's what it's all about. That's the expertise that needs to be articulated and marketed. And on the same vein, who here has ever said something that's starting to piss off another human being? Good at it. It was really, I see some people raising up both hands.
Okay, just a big segue to start off our presentation today. And once again, that was about a 90-minute presentation I recently did, but I wanted to open up the platform from today to talk about risk, perceived or otherwise, and what risk is. And I'll tell you where I'm borrowing this from. I'm borrowing this from counsel provided to me from the Ontario Trial Lawyers Association, because in order to define risk, we need to take a look at any event, any venue, any time we allow members of the public to interact with us, is the likelihood of harm or loss that we could experience by permitting a person access to our entity. And how is it calculated? Well, actually, it's a triage of considerations. Number one would be the foreseeable risk, the likeliness, or historical perspective. Has something like that happened here before? And if so, to what degree? In similar types of venues or similar types of events, has something historically happened like that before? Also, your vulnerability, how do people get in, how people get out? Is there access, as indicated in their presentation, to a parking lot? Do we have the ability to manage a violent incident? What policy or procedure, if it exists, do we have with respect to responding to threats or risks? And do we have an ejection protocol that would speak to public safety and, of course, staff safety? And we also need to take a look at the type of harm that this incident, if it does such occur in our premises, that may create and cause. I'm talking about new legislation, changes, legislation, criminal culpability, and probably the one dynamic that will hurt us the most is media attention. And certainly the process of how media can certainly change the world, change the way we see things through the world. Definition, if you will, as well, is there's two methods of how risk is viewed. Number one is proactively, how do we prevent it? And if something does go wrong, how do we react to it, that reactive policy or application? And I'm talking about in terms of a management or ownership policy or procedure and certain practices that we have. And this is with respect to the identity, identifying, analyzing, evaluating, controlling, monitoring, and responding to risk. As indicated earlier, the huge thing that's litigated, certainly in this country, not mentioned this province, is foreseeable risk. It's happened before. You knew what you knew, and what steps, if any, did you take? Because the reality is that if we can predict the situation from going to take place, we can also prevent it. I'd like to talk a bit, if I may, too, and I should preface this as well. I feel somewhat handcuffed. I can't, be there in person, and also that I can speak for roughly about an hour. I could speak for days. Ask my family. I can talk and talk and talk. But one thing we would like to look at is some of the common sources of litigation. And I should point out, since I've left policing, it's now been 20 years. I've testified as a subject matter expert now in 4 provinces and 2 territories in this country, 54 times. And the same issues keep coming up. And it's issues of litigation that we can take reasonable steps to manage and prevent. For example, in Ontario, if you provide or permit alcoholic beverages to be served, you're bound, duty bound, if you will, to comply with Smart Serve. For those in the industry, you'd probably be nodding your head to get it, but there's still a lot of people now may not be aware that Smart Serve now needs to be renewed every 5 years. It's no longer just one and done. You need to review it, the updates, the material, and of course, some of the legislation change and the requirements for staff. There's also at times, in terms of accountability, failure to comply with legislation, provincial legislation. I'm talking about the Liquor License Act and the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Also, at times, we have a game plan or an operational plan that would speak to our venue if something happens, if there is a health challenge, or there's a slip and fall, or there's an altercation, or some form of dispute. How are we expected to respond, identify, and to manage that sort of risk? That can in itself become a rather litigious question. And Occupier Liability Act, a lot of people perhaps do not understand the intensity of that particular act, especially when there's allegations for failing to provide reasonable levels of protection. This includes off your premises. For example, if your patrons, even your associates are leaving a venue, it's a safe trip to the parking lot leaving your venue that we have a likeliness to have to explain and justify. In the Liquor License Act, if you have a person that's become intoxicated within your venue, you're no longer just accountable until they get home. You're now accountable by legislation until they're sober again and you're able to exercise judgment. So that's an important part to know. Just to take a second to review the Occupier Liability Act, an occupier also includes a staff member. That's a person that's on the payroll. That's a person that's receiving compensation. And that includes a person who has responsibility for and a say in the condition of the premises, and most importantly, the activities that go on there. And how do we manage people entering and leaving the premises? Duties of an occupier require this concept of duty of care. And essentially that means that all people entering the premises and the premise, brought on the premises are safe, reasonably safe while they're there under our care. Another huge source of litigation is outward lack of security presence. Or I've been at a number of events at times where you might see people performing security-related duties, but they're wearing what's called event staff or volunteers or event staff. They're not licensed. They've not been vetted. They've not been approved. And even with the licensing component in Ontario, at least nowhere comparison of a law enforcement officer, but at least people who are licensed in security have the ability to say that you've had a government-sanctioned 40-hour training program. They have been licensed and they're insured insurance for the ability to provide their work. And at times, we also see at times where security is standing there, but they're standing by and only observing. And we call that observe and report, as opposed to another concept of intervene and protect. Occupier liability, by the essence of its legislation, requires us to take reasonable steps to provide a level of protection for people. It was interesting speaking to Councillor Agostino about how other municipalities can have an impact on industry standard. I draw your attention to a Toronto bylaw brought out by their business association, where you've actually developed an industry standard of a security to patron ratio of 1 to 100. In other words, you generally speaking would require 1 licensed security guard for every 100 patrons. And I have seen that in my experience that become a legislated or litigated component. Also, there is a requirement in Toronto, especially if you're going to see any sporting events, Leaf games, Raptor games, rock concerts, all that sort of thing, or any bar, if you wish to have an adult beverage, you need to be searched, you need to be wanted, and failure to do so can certainly result in a bylaw enforcement issue in the city of Toronto. And I already talked about this concept of failing to meet a duty of care. And just not to be, speaking to what that is, I'd like to give you a couple of examples of that. That talks about your conduct. And if we'll even get into the issue there about if there's a need to stop or restrain a person or remove them the premises, that should be done without any sort of injurious process. People shouldn't get hurt when we do that. And there indeed could be strong levels of liability and accountability, especially when some form of injury is sustained by yourself or your staff or people that have been invited into your venue. Another area of consideration is occupational health and safety. It's just not a best practice, it's a legislative requirement. And I'm talking about violent encounters, and Occupational Canadian Safety Magazine talks about workplace violence and abuse are the true hazards in the workplace, and better training can certainly help diffuse some of these ticking time bombs. So we like to talk about some of those areas, especially the areas of legal obligations to pretend there is a need to train and educate workers and to give people the basis to understand the risks they may be exposed to and reasonable steps in order to oversee them, including supervisors. Supervisors are required the additional training to care for others, and we're also regulated to work in concert with joint health and safety, occupational health and safety teams to look at and vet some of these educational programs. That's so paramount and so important today. There's also, and depending where you work, if there's a history, especially whether it be in healthcare or venues that people gather, to warn people of risks. And at times, certain individuals may be flagged, or there might be a certain higher percentage of violent encounters where people need to be provided information. Information we speak into safety. And there again, that falls back into the lap of an employer. There's also at times required to be an assessment of work violence. And we need to do, generally speaking, an assessment of the workplace, the type of work and the type of conditions that might require some form of equipment. I'm often asked, I was just literally prior to today's presentation, speaking with litigation counsel, talking about litigation at a pub, actually it was up in North Bay, Ontario, different municipality, but talking about what should a staff being provided to be able to do their job safely. And there's been, in that particular pub, there's been a real strong historical numbers of violence, a number of police calls, probably getting into the high dozens of police involved, or especially police officers, and the Alcohol Gaming Commission were making recommendations. We got to provide people the skills, the education, and sometimes the control mechanisms to ensure that we can do our work safely. I would also like to speak globally about the need for security, the cost. And often that's what I've found is that, well, cost is certainly a means or to perhaps really restrict security. It's very costly, could lose money, whichever, but there's also consequences. So some of the considerations I'd ask you to think about for the viewing audience for today, wherever you apply your trade or you oversee others, might there be a need within your entity, within your venue, within your establishment, to either detain and or restrain someone? And if you nod your head, if you'd agree with that particular question, that requirement, what means or what response mechanisms do you have in place? Might there be a need to protect or intervene or engage someone that's causing perhaps issues of public safety to themselves or others? And at times, would you agree, depending on the type of venue or entity you run, you might have to challenge someone. When I say a challenge, I'm not talking about verbally challenge, but you might have to ask for proof of their age, accreditation. It could be a wristband, it could be a lanyard, it could be a ticket. It could be just to prove that if you will be through a means of assessment to say as to whether you pay the required fees to get in, and of course, the issues associated to your conduct. Might there be a need at times to remove a patron or a member of the public from the premises? And if so, what is the parameters and how is that done? What are the control mechanisms done? I was mentioning a couple of minutes ago regarding this particular pub up in North Bay, and without getting into a lot of that issues of the litigation, it was unfortunate, but the doorman or bouncer, to remove the patron, an older patron, he put on what's called a full Nelson, where he linked his hands up and underneath his arms and put pressure onto the patron's neck, and unfortunately broke his neck during the process of removal. And I think you can imagine it's a huge litigation resulting out of that. And let's talk about training place. And I'm always a skeptic by nature, and always want, anytime you see anyone suggesting a need for money or to try to raise a profile, there's compensation afforded, we should be extremely cautious and skeptical. And with respect to this topic, I would invite you to go onto a public website, a ministerial website, and I'd offer it there on the screen. That's the Public Service Health and Safety Association. A lot of people are not aware of their presence, but they are the educational wing of the Ontario Ministry of Labor. And what they do is they provide consulting, training, and products to assist us in the workplace and to actually vet some of the areas that the Ministry of Labor may need to investigate and at times adjudicate in terms as to what is required, mechanisms required to be able to work safely and provide safe work in what we do. Some of these training requirements is put out there by the Public Services Health and Safety Association, and I'm here speaking specifically for security, is training in your legal authorities. You got to know what you got to know so you can do what you got to do. And in some circumstances, that would be the TPA, the Trespass to Property Act. Lets you understand at times as to what your legal authorities would be and what you may be permitted to do. Also, the Liquor License Act, understanding those provisions. And one area too, CCC, the Criminal Code of Canada, I would ask you please to check out section 34 of the Criminal Code of Canada. That outlines what's called the Citizens' Powers of Arrest. That's a part of the Citizens' Arrest and Self-Defense Act. It's not new legislation. It's been in for a little over 11 years. But there it actually speaks about some of the requirements that a citizen is required to meet, the standard, if you will, if you are to put your hands on a member of the public, and to not quote scripture or legalities, but you need to have your actions deemed to be reasonable and necessary. And the person that may vet that will be what's called a trier of fact, or in this case, that would be a judge. Also, there should be training in what we call de-escalation, calming people down. What'd you say? How'd you say it? And most importantly, why did you say it? And I found out of coming up 65 years of experience on this planet, I found probably in all aspects of my life, perhaps the most useful tool and or the most dangerous tool is the mouth, is what we say. And I have seen quite candidly, I've seen just words cause an ordinary person to rise to their feet and do extraordinary things. But if I may, and this in itself is like a 6-hour workshop, but I'm going to take a couple of minutes, if I may, to speak about de-escalation and de-escalation training, what it is. And a definition, of that heated exchange would be the use of verbal and nonverbal strategies. Nonverbal, of course, being body language that is used or intended to be used to prevent conflict or crisis and reduce the heat, reduce the intensity of a situation without the use of force. And actually, this definition is off a brand new ministry adopted. When I say ministry, in the Solicitor General, and it's actually relevant now with new police training, where there's no longer a use of force model in this province. You probably are familiar with that. It's now the Public Police Interactions Training Aid, and we'll speak about that in a second. I'll just show you a glimpse of what that looks like. But it's talking to people in crisis, talking to people when they're upset, talking to people when they're angry, talking to people when they're afraid, and when people are frustrated. And in moments of time and chaos and whatnot, we take a reasonable step to try to talk people down and to pre-think words as to what we say. I ask you honestly to yourself, have you ever said something to another person that you regret? Have you ever pressed a message, pressed sense of, wow, that was a little bit harsh? Have you ever said something to thoroughly piss off another human being? And have you been hurt? Have you been changed, if you will? You're supposed to be changed by words, the verbiage, if you will. I have seen careers come to an end by things that have been said, certainly relationships, business relationships, by words. So I cannot undermine the use of de-escalation strategies. And when we talk about people in crisis, well, what is a crisis? And, you see a picture on the screen like a light switch. It's been my experience that people can go into a crisis as quickly as it takes to turn on a light switch. Life can turn on a dime. But generally speaking, a definition of crisis would be a circumstance, or it could be a series of circumstances that may be perceived, may not be real, could be seen, or it could indeed be real. It could be an internal stressor, it could be external stressor, but one thing that categorically does is causes a person to change. And it's the role of that change, or the sense of the change, that needs us to think about how we engage others, especially in areas today of social media where likely you're being recorded from CCTV cameras, through the ears and eyes of the community, the public, and a lot of times cell phones. Cell phones has changed security and law enforcement tremendously since the early 1990s. And components of a crisis, I'd ask you, please, honestly, ethically, and morally, to think about components of a crisis. I'd offer you to consider that crisis, or being in a crisis, is individually based. In other words, what might be a crisis for me may not be for you, and vice versa. And because you may have not had that experience, or because you may not agree, doesn't make a person's crisis any more or any less valid. And when we sort of go on the understanding that, well, this person is in a crisis, I get that. May not agree, but I get that. That may, in its sense or itself, be a basis to how to start to respond to an individual. And what I'm talking about is a person's coping mechanisms. We all have different coping mechanisms. I expect a person 50 years old to have different coping mechanisms than a person perhaps 15 years old. Life experience and strategies and experience that we have interacting with others develops coping mechanisms. But at the same time, life experience can certainly be a causational factor. Without getting political, I know we're in City Hall there in Windsor, but people are struggling. And we've gone through COVID, we've gone through people losing businesses, mortgage renewals, the Leafs not doing well. I'm not trying to make light of people's strife, but people are indeed in a crisis, and trigger points are less and less. We're dealing with issues of mental health. I'm dealing right now also with a healthcare situation where, unfortunately, through restraint situation, a person in a Toronto hospital recently died. And as a result of that, two security guards in Toronto were criminally charged with criminal negligence causing death and manslaughter. Imagine for 1 second going to work, doing what you do on an ongoing basis. Then at the end of the day, the level of accountability is peaked to the point where you're now being held at a level of criminal culpability. And a lot of people's lives changed in that particular incident. But one thing that happens in a crisis is how people lose control. You lose control. We're all control freaks. I'm not being disingenuous when I say that. To a certain degree, we like things predictable. We like things to be on a course that we're familiar with. And suddenly when in our world, in the street, you're passing by others, or people are coming into your venue, or getting around people, whichever the issue might be, somebody could be within a control situation. And when we lose scope of that, beyond frustration, that's when people can collide, people can connect. You see, precipitating factors of a crisis, I'm sort of old school in the sense that I think a picture could be worth 1,000 words. I think you'd agree that, and I've asked usually classrooms when I teach de-escalation programs, what is that young lady showing? And people say, well, probably fatigue, or maybe anxiety, maybe anger, frustration, a whole plethora of explanations. But sometimes you can look at a person and sort of read them where they're at. It's so relevant, with family. If you've ever had a situation where you looked at a loved one, or partner in your life and say, you're off today. Everything okay? You seem different. And you get some feedback, maybe some mild resistance, or has that ever been said to you? Not quite on your game. But, we need to recognize that with respect to crisis, and this, by the way, is taught to law enforcement. I taught it when I was a staff trainer at the Ontario Police College. I continue to teach it today. People do not welcome change. If some part of my journey throughout the day, even the lineup at Timmy's is too long, or I'm having some significant crisis, that is really, really difficult times to manage. And I'm also going to talk about pain and grief and sorrow. And that's another huge issue that we need to talk about, especially in dealing with people suffering from mental health. And how do we approach? And how can you walk up to a person and say, hi, my name is so-and-so. My name is Steve. You okay? You see, what can I do to help you? And you hear something come back. And I always ask people, when we hear some sort of venomous response, please don't take it personal. Sort of treat yourself like you're coated in Teflon. Don't take it personal. Recognize that sometimes people are lashing out not because of you. Effects of fear. One thing I've heard at times in testimony when there's arrests or use of force being employed, I hear sometimes lawyers or even a Crown or a prosecution will say, you said there was resistance. Did you ever stop and think that that person was exhibiting signs, consistent with being in fear? They were afraid of you. They were afraid of your approach. You got into their personal bubble. Question, do you have a personal bubble? And how close will you allow people to get close to you before you start to feel uncomfortable? I'd argue, depending on the nature of an interaction, the only people you allow to get close to are the people you choose. not somebody who, A, you don't know their agenda, you may not trust, and you could be fearful of. Emotion. What's a person act like? How do they respond when they're upset? How do you respond to a person that's screaming, shouting, crying, weeping, not looking at you, looking away? I mean, there's a whole plethora of potential criteria for that, but just emotion. So you're not just dealing with perhaps a lucid individual, you're dealing with a person starting to exhibit and starting to display some of these areas. And keep in mind that generally speaking, people do have a strong resistance to being physically restrained or touched. And when we suddenly engage someone, you'll see a lot of people, the eyes will open up big, they'll pull back and don't touch me, get away from me. You may have heard the Arabius, get out of my face, that sort of thing. That would be a strong indicator. That might be evidence as opposed to a person that is having an issue associated with being physically restrained. The talking to the hand, if you've got young people, it used to be a real thing years ago, but talking to the hand, people at times are fear of being judged, fear of being labeled, fear of being identified, and also at times fearful of being arrested or restrained or freedom loss. Unless this and again could receive a significant area of discussion. That's the effects of addiction challenges and how addiction itself wreaks havoc in interaction with others and how we can respond in the manner in such a ways to meet those needs and at the same time that marital companion of our own personal safety. Some of these training areas continue, but also in effective communications protocols. What to say, different cultures, different sensitivities, different gender recognitions. Those are some of the huge topics of communications. Documentation, writing up the genesis of what you did and how you did. Being a former police supervisor, I used to look at a lot of people I worked with in policing and take the time, articulate. And I make people laugh. I'm not trying to, but what does CYA mean? CYA, a lot of people will cover your assets or something a bit more cruder. No, 2024 CYA means can you articulate? Can you explain? Can you justify? Can you convince? Honestly, documentation principles. And I mentioned a few minutes ago, I testified at a coroner's inquest just back here in August of this year. And that was the first time judicially this brand new visual model replacing the use of force model came into play. It was actually used at a shooting, a fatal shooting up in Nipigon, just south of Thunder Bay. But on the screen right now is this new visual model that you see. And there's a lot of verbiage changed. And this is going to take, unfortunately, a while. It's going to take a few years for law enforcement to catch up. The ministry seems to feel it could be 4 years, maybe more, where everybody else is being trained today by new recruits. But this is also the model that's been adopted by the same ministry that oversees policing for security provision. And you see on both sides of the screen, I don't know if you can see it, hopefully from your venue. And Councillor Agostino, if anyone wants to copy this or any aspects of the presentation, we'll get that to you later and you'll be in a position to pass it on. But this model is a good thing to know. On the top left side, you start to see some of those definitions that I spoke to and the areas especially of de-escalation and behaviors. On the right side of the screen, verbal and nonverbal communications. And I won't get into a lot of this visual graphic representation as to how we assess. This has no standing or basis in law, but it certainly gives you a basis on how to articulate what I saw, what I believed, and what I felt was reasonable and necessary at the time. This could be certainly a gateway to success in terms of explaining what you do. But that's the brand new model. That's hot off the press, and this is about 100 days old, certainly for this province of Ontario. Again, some of the training areas that we need to have is subject control options. Options to control, to restrain, not to hurt. I generally would not support administering strikes and or blows. You cannot, I'm talking about for security response or citizen response. See, police officers, unlike citizens, have a different protection, different layer of protection under the Criminal Code of Canada, specifically Section 25. Citizens don't have that. And that's why I'm always concerned, ladies and gentlemen, I'm always concerned when I see security or some form of training being provided at perhaps a police level, different applications, different requirement, different nature. But subject control techniques are not what you see in Monday Night Wrestling, not WWE, it's not the UFC. And it's a means and method to hold a person, restrain a person without causing bodily harm. There should also be a written policy and procedure on ejection? How do we get people out safely? But once they're outside their doors, our responsibility for their care and control does not cease. We must and we shall take reasonable steps to get them home. And that's not our policy procedure. That could become in itself a huge litigious aspect of duty of care components. There should also be proof of training. And I won't get into saying, well, you should go with them or whoever. And I'm being non-self-serving today. Yes, I provide training programs, but I'm not here to make a sales pitch to you. But I will suggest this to you, please. Whatever training programs you have, you should be demanding and you should receive proof of insurance. Their programs should be underwritten. That means that there is something that is approved the training. And I'd also ask for a curriculum vitae or a resume to show, have you ever qualified? Have you ever spoken in a courtroom as a subject matter to defend this curriculum? Those are two areas I think it would check, put you in a far safer avenue before you can consider third-party training. The other area I like to talk about is the aftermath. And I'm going to get pretty close to wrapping here, but I want to show you a couple of videos. Is the aftermath, the consequences, if you will, of something that's gone wrong, something that's gone awry, something that meets the media, and something where your phone, I used to say switchboard, but your phones are ringing off the hook because people are concerned, people are angry, and there's allegations and accusations of abuse. So some of these areas I'm going to take you to, if there's any Maple Leaf fans out there, this was an incident that occurred, it will be now 10 days ago, it was at a Leaf game here in Toronto, and an incident occurred involving a patron. I'm going to run the video here. I had a brief snippet of an interview on here, but you can see that as well. But let's run it, let you see it, and then we can talk globally in terms of what some of the issues here have been.
Good evening, I'm Chris Glover. We begin tonight with that security incident from Saturday's Leafs game. Video of the takedown shows event staff kneeing the man in the head while he's being restrained on the ground. Toronto police say the video misses alleged actions from the man prior to the video starting and have since charged a Hamilton man with assaulting a police officer and 3 security guards. Dale Manuktuk joins us live from outside Scotiabank Arena tonight. Dale, take us back to Saturday and what we've learned about this case.
Well, Chris, it happened during the Leafs 5-3 loss to the Avs. Just before 10 p.m., security went to go check and see if a man was doing okay. Now, police say that the guy got confrontational with security and then allegedly assaulted 3 guards. Now, a police officer came to arrest the man, and again, allegedly, that man assaulted a cop. What's interesting about the video that's been going around social media is it doesn't show any of these alleged assaults. What it does show is the man being brutalized by event staff. This video, captured on Saturday, has been viewed thousands of times online. The man in the blue suit repeatedly dropping his knee or shin onto another man's head. Moments later, his head is pounded onto the ground near what appears to be a small pool of blood. Video posted online doesn't show what happened before. I'm showing you a snippet of a video.
Well, that's very excessive from what I saw.
Allegedly assaulted 3 security guards and a police
on the ground. That's excessive force. You don't need a knee to the head. I used to do security. You don't need a knee to the head. Put him down the most calmest way possible, but if someone's retaliating and they're going to hurt more, you're going to let him up and he's going to continue, you got to stop him.
Toronto police have since charged 37-year-old William Anderson of Ancaster with 3 counts of assault and 1 count of assaulting an officer.
If it ever did end up in a trial, we have to remember that in Canada, the courts have already ruled that people are not expected to act to a level of perfection when using force.
Looking at only that video snippet, it would suggest that the force would be excessive or extreme.
This former Toronto cop was also an instructor at the Ontario Police College.
Not only at one point would have placed his knee, but he transitioned. He moved that, I think, 2 or 3 times, maybe 3 times. So it wasn't an accidental placement. That is not a focused point of subject control. Why? Because it leads individual to injury.
Last month, in a separate, unrelated incident, video from a pro-Palestinian protest captured a police officer appearing to place his knee on the neck and head area of a demonstrator who allegedly shoved the cop. Toronto police initially said there was no knee-on-neck tactic used and have since said the appropriate amount of force was applied. But police and security guards aren't subject to the same training.
They're 2 totally separate entities, sir, not to be confused with one another. Security division does not require a legislated, laid out training program to meet any particular standard, not in this province anyway.
Chris, most of the people I spoke to tonight agree that what they saw was excessive force, even with the context that this man allegedly assaulted 3 guards and a cop. It's unclear if the guards will face any discipline for their actions, but MLSE does say that it's conducting its own investigation. As for the Hamilton man, William Anderson, he's going to be in court on March 12th here in Toronto.
Okay, so I'll leave it up to you to determine whether that was excessive or not. But just a bit of, I call it the money shot, just to sort of see the knee placement. That went extremely viral. To finish off, a few considerations we need to look at, I'll take another minute here, is anything we do, it can certainly result in negative media coverage, the issue of public scrutiny, police investigations that could lead to criminal prosecution, civil litigation, and Ministry of Labor investigation, loss of employment. You could be fired, and sometimes security contracts can be severed. So at this point, Councillor, if I have an opportunity, answer any questions, if there are any questions.
I guess we were going to say questions for the end, but if anybody wants to join a question for Stephen and from the hospitality sector or anything, now's the time, or we'll just keep moving on to Barry. Any questions? We have one. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. I worked in the security industry for 23 years. But at point, it becomes your safety against the other person's safety of what they can do. I've been bit, I've been stabbed, I've been through it all, spit at. So at this point, like we use the use of force, as you say, what does it become your safety versus theirs? And how do you address that?
Great question. Thank you, sir, for providing that. Unlike a police officer, you have a right to back away. You have a right to move yourself from a threatening position. Call the police. If you feel a situation has got to the point where you as a civilian cannot physically engage, back up, become the best witness you can, and give a police officer all the information you can, become the best witness that money can buy. But no one, sir, certainly this province, can, or no one should, ask you to put yourself at a threshold of assaultive behavior that can interfere with you going home tonight to people you care about. Sir, stand back, de-escalate, become the best witness, and give an attending police officer wherever in this province as much information as you possibly can.
Appreciate that. But what if the situation is somebody's out of control and they're causing harms to other, and it's your job? So do you step back and just let them cause the harm that they do and then call the police? Or what is it that you do with your best knowledge?
They're getting fair question, but sir, nothing's more important than you. And I'm not being disingenuous when I say that. I'm saying to police officers when I was a supervisor, you've got to think about yourself. You need to have resources in there in place. They take you out, sir, who's going to help others, right? So there again, what I'd ask you to do is to do the absolute best you can. I'm not certain as the level or extent of training you receive or equipment you may or may not be provided, whether you have additional resources, depending on the venue you work at. Sometimes there can be a containment issue, but generally speaking, sir, to go into a situation that you might be exposed to physical harm or peril, my recommendation, and then there again, speaking to occupational health and safety, you would have the right contextually to remove yourself from that and call police. Take the best steps you can without putting yourself in peril. I'll defer that to my friend, my brother, the fellow police officer, if I will, but that would be my respectful comments to you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
That was great, Steve. Thank you very much. And now it's my pleasure to introduce from Windsor Police, Barry Horton.
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate being invited to speak on behalf of the police service from the councillor. The perspective I'm going to share today is going to be more from the physical circumstances, the physical situational circumstances of your place of business, your hospitality business, whether it's a fast food restaurant, a bar, a restaurant, a place that gathers for hospitality purposes that provides, benefit to our community. So the perspective I'm going to share specifically is, the next slide, is called crime prevention through environmental design, which is, as the definition says, the proper design, effective use of the built environment leading to a reduction in the fear and incidence of crime and disorder. And when you do that well, you get a handle on something the previous speaker spoke about, which was predicting behavior, but in a prevention way. So it's one thing to predict behavior, but if behavior is bad, even though you can predict it, you don't do anything about it. That's not really going to help you. So it's a matter of recognizing cues and then making adjustments to your physical circumstances to prepare yourself to not have these problematic incidents or acts of behavior in the first place. But if they do, allow you to effectively mitigate those situations. So there's definitely an application of crime prevention through environmental design, or CPTED as we call it for short, to the hospitality sector and the businesses that work in that field. Next slide. And all of them revolve around the graphic there, the crime in the literature, in the research literature, the crime triangle, but it's really the crime and disorder triangle. And when you have a situation where you have an opportunity for an act of crime or disorder to occur, you have an offender who's willfully wanting to commit something to their own advantage, and you have a victim. The victim can be property or a person or both. When those three ingredients come into play at the same time, you have an act of crime or disorder. The whole idea is to try and prevent that from happening. So you just have to take out one of the three ingredients. If you don't have a victim, it's no problem. If you're able to thwart or prevent the offender from acting, you've taken away the crime or disorder action as well. And if you take away the opportunity for that action to happen, for sure you're going to prevent that unfortunate circumstance from happening. So CPTED has impact on all three of those ingredients in the crime and disorder triangle. It has its greatest application in creating or minimizing opportunity for these things to happen. So they revolve around these, and I won't go into these in great detail. I do this in my position, but natural surveillance, how easy it is for activity and persons who are conducting activity that's problematic, how easy it is to observe that activity without going out of your way to do it. And that's your staff, but that's also other patrons who are there in the law-abiding way, just trying to enjoy it, an evening dinner or an evening drinks or with friends, and they observe behavior that's problematic. How well can they observe that and then report it and have it acted upon? Territorial reinforcement talks about your physical place of business and how well you separate areas where the public is allowed to go versus where the public should not be allowed to go, where should only be staff. And how well you do that really minimizes problems for you. If you don't do that very well and the lines are blurred and a member of the public can access areas they shouldn't be going to, that's usually a path towards a problematic event happening. Access control, coming and going from your establishment. How many entry points do you have to your business? Depending on its size, you may have to have more than one for fire egress and that sort of thing. But especially when you have a capacity limit and you want to make sure that you don't lawfully go over that capacity limit, you want to make sure you control access in and then out. I'll talk about more about that in a minute. Target hardening, that talks about the physical fortification of your space, how well you secure your physical attributes of your business, particularly when your business is not open. Activity management. So your activity is how well you manage when your business is in operation. How well do you and your staff manage the activity that's going on so that it occurs in a lawful manner, people enjoy themselves, and they don't take away from people who are there to lawfully attend your business. And once you have activity where that happens, other law-abiding customers say, I'm going to come back here because they didn't handle the incident very well. I was 4 tables away and I still felt uncomfortable. And these people think that way when they see this, even if they're not the perpetrator, but they see it, and how you respond to it and how you act on it makes a big difference in whether they're going to come back. And all this revolves around something I call behavior engineering, which is just tweaks and small adjustments in physical pieces of your space to make the space much more conducive to lawful, enjoyable use that's comfortable for people, and it makes it a disadvantage for unlawful behavior to happen. Okay, next slide. So some key facts to consider. You certainly don't want to, when I look at somebody's property and their business, and I'm not going to recommend some things I know are going to solve the safety and security issue, if it means the implementation of those measures takes away from the ability of the business to run. The core purpose of your business is to serve people, serve them food and beverages in an environment that's enjoyable for them to have a nice social evening. So we can't be, even if you have some issues, we can't come in there and suggest to you, nor should someone else, a provider that provides security equipment, that provides something that's going to solve the problem of the security or the safety thing, but at the same time, the consequence to that is the functionality of your business. That's not a good solution. In the case of restaurants and bars, there's a recognition these are key community facilities that bring great social and economic value to our community. I'm a lifelong resident of the city of Windsor. I've worked downtown for I worked as a police service for 34 and a half years. I worked for a consulting engineer for before that. That was in the downtown area. So I've worked downtown for over 35 years, almost 36 years. But I'm a lifelong resident of the city too. And so I come to downtown a lot with my family. And I have throughout my age increased time there. So when I was younger, I came to different facilities, came to different purposes. It doesn't change though. Downtown's valuable and hospitality businesses are such a core fabric of the sustainability for downtown. So I also want to point out that our restaurants and bars and places of hospitality are workplaces, Health and Safety Act. So Steve mentioned this in his presentation as well. And it's very important that no employee should have to go to work thinking, I got 8 hours to try and get through this shift because I'm scared about what's going to happen of the next person that comes to the door that might be a problem. I know there's a lot of good people that are coming here, but I don't know which of the 10% or the 2% that might ruin it my whole evening. No employee should feel that way. And so, and the Health and Safety Act changed drastically around 2010 when they added the whole acts of harassment and workplace violence. So that's an eye opener. So when I look at these types of things, I'm looking at as a workplace as well, not just for the general public and their safety, and that's important, of course, but a worker that has to work there and live in that situation. When we talk about safety, we're saying prevention first, remediation second. What I mean by that is it takes way more energy, way more time, way more resources to fix something after it happens than preventing it in the first place. So whenever someone questions me, I hear what you're saying, you're suggesting I do this or do that to prevent this from happening, but it's okay. I wasn't anticipating that it's going to cost some dollars to do that. Yes, you have to look at prevention as an investment, because if you don't do it, likelihood, there's a reason why that conversation is happening in the first place. You've already had evidence that you've got some problematic behavior, then the fix it is way more expensive. Trust me, I've been doing this for many, many years. I've done over 3,000 crime prevention through environmental design audits of varying buildings, residential, businesses, commercial, hospitality, schools, parks, roads. Prevention is way, way, way cheaper, socially, economically, everything, than fixing it. And it works best when everybody gets it and everybody plays their role. So that includes your employees, that includes the public, that includes the police. We're asked to come in and help you on something. And we get successful outcomes when everybody makes it priority. So just deploying a lockdown approach isn't sustainable. So to me, it's like, a hospitality business, it has different criminological patterns than other land uses. So if the way I try to look at these things is I'm customizing how a hospitality type business works. What are the risks and threats that they would experience that wouldn't be experienced at a clothing store or a gas station? Now they have different things. Okay, so it's just assessing unique situationally driven risks. Also mentioned by a previous speaker. Situation driven risk that's unique to your business. Next slide, please. So there's several criminological theories that apply to the subject I'm talking about, CPTED, crime prevention, design. But the one that's most paramount, that I think is most applicable in a situation of hospitality sector, is the broken windows theory. Very well-known criminological theory that was developed in the early 70s by two criminologists, George Kelling and James Wilson. George Kelling actually visited this community back in the 90s when we had some issues with the large-scale license establishments, and we brought George Kelling in and had some good conversations. What that means is today, literally a broken window or graffiti tag or some debris that's dumped in front of your business and that's not cleaned up. Little things like that, where you don't quickly recognize something's out of place, and if you don't fix it right away, it's a sign to everybody that either they don't get it, they don't care about their employees or their customers, or they're just passive and they're not willing to, their tolerance level for that unlawful behavior is too high. Okay, so broken windows should be something that you carry a low tolerance for accepting. And when it happens, deal with it right away. If you don't, it'll creep up and just swallow you up. Okay, it can greatly influence your business's reputation. And my kids are adults now, 30 and 27, but what I used to tell them repeatedly is what takes you 10 years to build in terms of your reputation, your desired aspects of your personality, takes 10 seconds to undo. And then it takes, once undone, it takes you another 10 years, if ever, to rebuild it. Okay, so think of that. That's what broken windows should be, the little things. Just don't let it get to the point where it took you years to build your business and have great things, and you're known as a great place for people to come and enjoy their social evening, and then just one incident can be so damaging. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, I'm sure, but that's where, from safety and security perspective, broken windows recognition really helps you stay in focus there. Next slide. So here's some steps I'm suggesting. Now, this doesn't apply to all businesses in all situations, but these should be considered as sort of a general palette of things you might want to consider. And they're in no particular order. First and foremost, try and keep all areas of the property at an elevated level of maintenance. That's something that you have control over. If you can, constantly keep the physical circumstances, the physical elements of your property at a high level of maintenance, it does the talking for you. It tells the public this is a place I should go to. They care about their customers, they care about their staff. It always looks clean, it looks inviting, it looks welcoming. They don't put up with things that shouldn't happen there. That's what good maintenance quietly messages out constantly. Okay. The second point, if your staff are well trained, constantly aware and what I call visually vigilant in their actions. They're always attuned to what's going on around them during their shift. Not just like if it's a server who has a section. I used to be able to enter at TV's other place. That's how old I am, because TV's other place doesn't exist anymore. You have your section with 5 or 6 tables, but if you're also a part of the team where you're visually sort of watching out for your colleagues' section when you have a moment, and so it's not just your own section. You might be a lot more vigilant about that section, because that's where your customers are that you're serving, but you're also visually aware of the other surroundings, like the path from your section or your friend's colleague section to the washroom, things like that. So you want to optimize being highly visible by all patrons. So I put in uniforms. I realize uniforms aren't something that every business has, but what it does, the form of a uniform can take several different shapes. So it's not like it just fits one thing. But if I'm a customer and I see, I see like 7 people here that have a gray T-shirt and something else that maybe is identifiable. That tells me probably, without having to ask, they all work here. So they have more knowledge of what goes on here than the other people sitting at other tables. So if I have a concern and my server isn't available at the time, or the bartender, I can go to anyone else that's wearing one of the gray shirts that 7 or 8 of them have, knowing that it's likely that they also work here and might be able to be aware of something, and I can report it to them. You want to, I really think this is a big one. Regularly attend/inspect washrooms. Public washrooms are the catalyst for problematic behavior. I'm speaking from a ton of experience. They're necessary evil. We got to have them. But that's where people who are not lawfully minded will seek out as a great point of opportunity execution. And a lot of times the washroom is tucked away down a hall. Go turn left, and if you ask where the washroom is and the server has to take more than 10 seconds to tell you where it is, okay, it's probably going to be a little bit of a convoluted path to get there. The more tucked away, visually speaking, something like the public washroom is, the more opportunities exist for someone to use that space to do something inappropriate, take drugs, steal someone's purse, confront them, cause a melee, et cetera, et cetera. So without, you being a security person, but you're an employee of that establishment, whether it's, a fast food restaurant or a licensed establishment, And maybe part of your training is you're to each attend somewhere each hour, 3 times each. Just that's the goal. 7 of you working on a shift, 3 times each. If you're randomly going back there and people that are casing the washroom area for some kind of something to do unlawfully, and they keep seeing every time they see one of the 7 in the gray shirt or the uniform or the staff member back there checking to make sure the paper towel dispenser is refilled, or so they're there for a purpose that's productive, but really your secondary purpose is you're watching out to see if there's any visual cues of behavior that might say, I need to keep an eye on this person, or I might have to call the police because of the way that they're acting. So it's just sort of using that customer service type routine, in this case, visiting the washroom to make sure it's clean and there's not paper towels and there's water spilled over the floor or whatever to do that. As the previous speaker mentioned, get training in dealing with difficult patrons. You want to establish and maintain good lighting for visual accountability. On the inside, it's a little more challenging. You're trying to balance ambiance with comfort and everything else with visual accuracy and things like that. Outside's a different story. There's no reason to under illuminate your entry points, the perimeters around your building, and everything else. I'll show you a couple of slides shortly on that to explain that a little bit better. Something I think is important, especially with a bar that's got a license capacity of 200 and you have 200 people in there now and 80 people want to get in because your bar's that's happening in place. So now they got to wait outside because lawfully you can't take any more in past your license 7. But you can't let anybody in until people go out. So if there's a way that you can physically separate pre-drinkers from post-drinkers, that's not a bad thing. That's that access control element I talked about under the CPTED principles. Because once a person's been consuming alcohol, obviously their behavior, the judgment is not the same as a person who hasn't. And the people out there are waiting to get in. So they're anxious, they're already impatient, it might be cold, they're waiting to get in. So this whole access control, the flow of people in and out of your business, really important. If you notice damage to any elementary fixture or piece of your property that's broken, or you have graffiti, clean it up, fix it as quickly as possible. It sends the message that you're in control. You care about the reputation of your business, and even little things like that, maybe they're big, aren't going to detract from the reputation of your business of being a safe, comfortable place for people to come to. You want to address something I call loitering magnets, which can be covered spaces, window ledges, particularly during non-business hours. I've observed it. You've got a sheltered entrance to your business. It's not so much in the hospitality sector as it is in the retail sector, I will say that. But that will become occupied space during non-business hours because that person that's occupying the space won't be challenged. Now, I'm not here to sound insensitive to our homeless population and everything else, but that a doorstop of a business is not the intended purpose for that space. It's not intended to be a multi-hour sheltered space. So we need to address such situations with dignity and good thought, but don't physically create the circumstances to allow that to happen in the first place, ideally, and then you can prevent it. Yeah.
Sorry. So who does the responsibility fall on to enforce that?
So it's
Because I'm sure you've seen the alley behind.
Oh, yes.
The alley behind Olette on the west side,
Yeah.
and
so
there
public
many
spaces are public. So the police, you should when in doubt, you should be called. Okay. So
sorry, not to digress from what you're getting at. I just wanted to.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And once it's on your property, you're in your property. Now we're talking about a trespassing thing. So you have, as the property owner, you have the right to not have the person trespass because they're not there constructively or as you want it to be. So again, though, it helps. Dealing with that on your own is going to be more risky than involved.
Absolutely.
Yes, I understand what he's talking about, but most of the time, it's not the businesses that are open, it's the vacant businesses
Right.
that reflect on that. So what do you do when it's a vacant business that's affecting your business?
Amen.
I know exactly what he's talking about. The homeless are sleeping in all these not abandoned, but not used buildings that are there.
I think I'm gonna let our third speaker is gonna talk more on this. I'm not trying to dump off the question, but so because it's a delicate thing, it's so hard to because as a member of a public service delivery organization, a civil servant, I don't want to shred the dignity of another human being to affect a security solution. But at the same time, you still have a security issue. So where do we find it out? So that's why We need to pool our resource, pool our expertise to say how we,
You guys,
in a unique situation like where we have a vacant building. So a vacant building is in any situation, whether it's our downtown, whether it's a neighborhood. If you have a neighborhood's just all homes, but one is vacant, that's going to be a magnet for problematic.
I got one more thing to add to that. Just like this happened this week and exactly Saturday, we have an alcohol rep that came to do a presentation. Somebody that's homeless legit walked up to their car and opened their door and tried to get them out of it. And back there is a big issue. You know what I mean? We want to use the space as a nice wide open space, but it's very unsafe because literally that's where these people are living at this point. And that's where our businesses are operating. I feel like we need something more back there as a police presence at least,
Absolutely.
or something, because honestly,
So a couple things in relation to the unoccupied property, but it's owned by somebody. So there's, the property owner still has carriage over that responsibility over any activity that occurs on their property, even though their business or whatever the land use is closed at the moment. They still have it doesn't release them from being responsible for the activity that goes on there, especially when that activity infiltrates and affects surrounding properties. And so that's where there are laws, the property standards bylaw and things like that. There are laws that out there that allow for that enforcement of responsible action by accountability by property owners. The last point I want to mention here is I recommend doing this for your own business. Conduct a crime prevention through environmental design, a CPTED self-audit of your business to identify strength to build off of and identify anything that, oh, this is something I really need to give some attention to. As I do the assessment, I realize I need to make some improvements in this area. Now, Ronaldo circulated a really good document that's part of the that document from New Zealand. Looks like that. Was that publicly?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. But here's what, so this document came out of New Zealand in 2017 or 2018. So it's a few years old. I can tell you, I reviewed it thoroughly. It's still very, very relevant. It's entitled Safer Bars and Restaurants, and it's based on CPTED principles. Okay, so I'm a CPTED person. I'm a lifelong learner. So I saw this. That's really interesting. I'm always also very interested in what they do in other countries, because even though there might be slight differences because their laws and their cultures and that, there's more in common than there is different. In this document at the back, there's a checklist tool. It's very good. Now, I can tell you, I have created customized checklists, CPTED checklists for property owners to walk through their own property. And if you wish the police to participate in that, we will do that as well through our neighborhood officers and whatnot. And the checklist, though, is very specific. This one I looked at, it's very specific to the hospitality sector. And it prompts you, it asks you questions like, I won't go into too much detail, I don't want to put all the time here, but just, I'll just pick one at random. Interior layout. The premises is laid out so staff can monitor all patrons at all times. Yes or no? If it's no, okay, how can I improve on that so that there aren't any blocked off here? So this type of checklist prompts you to want to have all yeses, but where you don't have a yes, you either have a straight out no or an unsure. That's where you need to work on it. I've developed these checklists customized for other land uses that have very unique crime and disorder problems that no other land use has, like a pharmacy. So there are a lot of things that pharmacies have that regular retail have. They have shoplifting. What a regular retail store doesn't have is fentanyl and other drugs that people will use firearms to try and achieve, and they'll come in and they'll threaten staff. So what I'm saying is this checklist here, and I don't mind reviewing it and Windsorizing it. We have a general checklist on our Windsor Police Service website, but I think for your sector, we would take this one, and I don't have a problem customizing a checklist tool that says this is really, really geared to someone that works and or owns property in the hospitality sector. Next slide. So this very basic, in a good kitchen design, you're trying to connect the sink, the refrigerator, the stove. In a good safe design, you're trying to connect the dots here. You're trying to take advantage of your occupied space, which is where your customers sit. Your staff are roaming around or viewing out from behind a service counter, perhaps, a queuing area, a patio area, anywhere where there's observable people that can take in what's going on, and if need be, report it to somebody. Maybe not initially the police. They tell their server, they tell the bartender. I just noticed this guy doing this. looked like he slipped something in this person's drink when she went to the wash. Like, you want to create as many opportunities for the fellow public to help with the overall security of your space. These vulnerable spaces, public washrooms, a back alley, especially if that's where you go to, you know, take your garbage out, staff come and go for employee entry. You know, be mindful of how that's physically laid out and the risks that might be there, you know. And then you want to connect that with the point where their random traffic is coming and going, whether it's employees and or customers through your front doors. Next slide. So I pulled this just off the internet. This is just a conceptual design. Okay, it's not a hard architectural design. It's a conceptual design, but it shows a lot of things I like from a septic perspective. Is why I think it's good. Everything is visually out there. So there's very few hidden pockets, including an outdoor patio space, doors centrally positioned, the spacing of the tables. The path to the washroom is not some scavenger hunt through some 10 miles of bad New England roads to get there. It's visually accountable, but it still meets all the requirements. It's private, everything else at the door, and else, but if something's going to go down there, it's going to be a lot more detectable because this is here and not down some hallway and over. Staff here just naturally view outwards. So you're just, again, natural surveillance without the staff having to go out of their way to see much of that, what's going on within the interior space of that facility. They have it. Next slide. Here's a floor plan of an actual, this is from many years ago. This is an actual floor plan I reviewed for a fast food restaurant in our city. It slopes, because that's not important. What's important is this isn't the original design. The original design had certain pieces, in my opinion, in the wrong place. Okay, they had the washrooms down a long hallway. They had a few things that I didn't like. So we moved it so that the washrooms are up here. Here's the service counter. And here's the main entry, and here's the secondary entry. So anything that goes on here is highly detectable if something is going awry. And it's detectable by employees because they're right there, and other customers. And then without the employees having to take their eye off the rest of the restaurant, the interior of the restaurant. So principally, this is a very, very good design. And here's the other key. When you see washrooms stacked with this men's and women's washroom, you should never have to pass the men's washroom to get to the women's washroom. And that risk is even more magnified when you're down a hallway, a long corridor, because it creates an entrapment effect that criminals use to entrap what is typically a more vulnerable victim, a female victim versus a male victim. Well, not exclusively, I'll tell you that, but this design principally optimizes natural surveillance, optimizes activity management, access control is very well articulated, and the vulnerable space, in this case, the washroom is placed very purposefully there. Next slide. I threw this up. This is in Tampa, Florida. So I was also in Europe in the fall, and I will tell you that I've been to many cities for work and for pleasure, and Zagreb, Croatia. I've never seen graffiti until I went to Zagreb. And they've just given up there. That's what people, natives of Zagreb told us. It's overrun. We can't get ahead of it now. Everything is tagged there. And that just, as a tourist, like, boy, I just don't feel comfortable there. But other parts of Croatia don't have that. And it's not like it's a Croatian thing. It's just the capital. Here's what they did in Tampa. They had a huge problem with all these utility boxes that were constantly getting tagged. And they're an easy target. They got a big surface and that. And how creative is this? Is there a vaccine for graffiti? Public art vaccine for graffiti, in my opinion. I asked myself, is this eligible for the City of Windsor Arts grant? Throw that out there. But this is kind of like, this is where you don't want to limit any kind of creativity. Before you say, that's ridiculous, that'll never work. It worked in Tampa, Florida. After they tried a bunch of other things and kept cleaning up the graffiti, let's try something different. And that worked.
We're actually doing that in Windsor right now. We have the whole alley set.
Yeah, exactly.
So honestly,
Winter spaces that are notoriously tagged and targeted for that.
but that confirms your point that it did help a lot, and nobody tags back there now. It looks amazing.
Yeah.
I think the only problem we'll have back there is now just lighting. If we get more lighting, and some variance will be fine.
I'm a big proponent of that, as the council will say. Next slide. So speaking of lighting, for hospitality properties, on your exterior, lighting is so important to establish and maintain safe usage, especially during these non-daylight hours. Okay, you still want, you're open well into the evening. You want people to feel comfortable and safe coming and going from your business. Lighting is important. On the inside, I understand the whole challenge. You know, you don't want it, you know, a laboratory, you know, do surgery type brightness. But you still want to balance the ambiance with good visibility that makes people feel comfortable because they're visually aware of their surroundings. Okay. There's light has very technical properties. I don't want to get into the detail of this, but particularly outdoor lighting, this is more critical. Indoor, not as much because there's more flexibility because of the nature of how you use indoor. But you know, the most prominent light source out there is light emitting diodes, LEDs, the most cost effective, and they produce good quality light. You don't have to replace them, and they're great. Color temperature, the temperature of a light dictates what you're going to see that's under those lighting conditions. And combined with that is something called CRA, color rendering index, or the ability for that gray shirt to look exactly that shade of gray in nighttime conditions, where I'm only relying on lighting instead of daylight. So I know what that shirt looks like in the daylight. I want it to look exactly the same under nighttime conditions, 4,000 K, 1,000 degrees Kelvin color temperature, and with a minimum color rendering index value of 75 is going to ensure that. Why is it important? Because when you say the suspect was wearing a gray shirt, what kind of gray? Light gray, dark, a charcoal gray shirt, medium charcoal, that level of detail is way more accurate, way more valuable in terms of a suspect description. Your tattoo and everything else, the detailing of that is going to be better reported on when the conditions are such that I can see that. Okay, so that's why that's really, really important. Next slide. I'll just whip through the last few because I don't want to take too much time. I'm almost done. So here's, you know, a little getaway weekend my wife and I took to beautiful Paris, Ontario. We happened to go a few years ago when they were transitioning from high pressure sodium, which our community did many years ago, the orangey type street lights. But they still have some at the time that we took this, was 2018, to LED. But see how these public spaces that connect businesses. So public spaces are important, just as important, like, at least from the police perspective, as your businesses or private properties, because they're the connecting rods between businesses and within an overall area, in this case, our downtown. So next slide. So here's With Alley. So I remember Vincent Georgie came to see me, talked to me about it. We want to do this, we'll put the string lights. Are you supportive of this with the mural? I said, am I supportive? Yeah, yes to all of that. This makes that space far more inviting and far less intimidating. And it tells people who want to venture through the downtown and go from business to business. I'm going to walk from this restaurant to that bar. We're going to go to a show. I don't have a problem going through this space. I feel comfortable at night or during the day. Next slide. Here's me. I pulled this off of Google Earth, but this is Maiden Lane. And just principally, there's a lot of good things about this. The patio is very organized. It's got this railing that still allows sight lines through it. So it's not opaque. Notice how the garbage and receptacles and the recycling receptacles, very organized and out of the way. You got the murals, you got some landscaping, strong sight lines. I can see from Olette back to Palliser and then again uninterrupted. That's really, really good. These are all things that principally support good crime prevention through environmental design that make businesses that are part of that fit in nicer and just it's a better, safer, more comfortable experience for those who patronize there. Next slide.
My bar is on Maiden Lane, and yeah, that's a bit misleading. Like,
Well, perhaps. I mean, that's a photo in time.
yeah, I know that, but from left or right of that photo, there's a lot of things that don't crazy stuff that's happening probably right now.
Yeah. Okay. So when that happens, that's what we should visit that site and look at, do a physical ground truth.
It looks like you already have.
Well, in that case, that was from Google Earth, so that wasn't a photo that I took. I just pulled it up.
And like this whole thing, my patrons and myself included, I'm not really worried about what's going on the inside of my bar. I'm worried about what's going on the outside. And so are the people that come to my bar and the people that sit in the window and look outside. I think the inside of my bar is quite safe.
Okay.
When they leave and when they come in is a different story.
Okay. So good point. A couple things. That's why it's important that this is done collectively. The more people that do this connectively, and including other property owners that don't own hospitality businesses or retail business, like the city ones who own the flats. Okay, so the public infrastructure still have, because those are the connecting points, those are the connecting threads, those have to be maintained in a safe manner as well, in order for, if everybody does their share, okay, I can't control the design and the upkeep of the inside of your bar. I'm City of Windsor maintenance guy, but what I can do is make sure that the alley is kept clean and that kind of thing. So, and when you see that, especially something that's in the public space, call 311. It might not have, at that time that you notice something, it doesn't warrant calling 911, for example. It's not, there's not an immediate public safety thing, but there's something that needs addressing. And that's what 311 is designed to do. And I know I've heard all the things, it's not the most efficient and everything else. I just did it for my own property, and it took them a lot longer to come out and look at this tree that was damaging my yard, but they did come out. Then, okay, this slide here. So I took this in November when I was in Toronto, and lighting wise, it's fine and else, but look at the two, these are literally one going off the same street. They're just a block apart or less than a block apart. This one is open and clean, everything else, same rainy night. That's a no-no. And and how long that stays like that elevates the risk. So what happens is when someone sees that, that's immediately got a big sign on it, come and loot me. There might be value here. You're just inviting a type of activity that's not what the space is intended for. And it's probably, if it invites an activity that the space was not intended for, there's a good chance it's not a good thing. Okay.
May I ask, are you showing this as well to the people in government in place? Like, are they going through the same program? Because, you know, for example, that maiden lane photo.
Yeah.
To look right towards where he's at, it's pretty well illuminated, but they still have their fair share of problems coming through, funneling down. You can't change that. We understand that's the connecting block. But I also know you're not in charge of this, so I apologize to take up your time.
No, that's
you accountable.
But that's why we're here. These are good conversations. But no, don't apologize.
You know, heading between Park and Maiden Lane is exactly that, like full of trash, dark, unmanaged, and who do we hold responsible? You know, the police rarely come through, although when I reach out to them, they tell me that, oh, we are supposed to be out there on the daily, on the bikes, this and that, and they're not, because I'm there 50 hours a week, day and night, and I don't see it. And then I see public works cars going through, so if they see these messes, who do we get to deal with it? Because it's not my job, it's not his job. But it does make it dangerous for our patrons leaving, or our coworkers, employees that leave at the end of the night. And I'm not personally threatened, but
Actually,
I find this conversation hard because we're talking about it, but we're all doing our best within our own businesses. But it doesn't seem like the city's holding up their end of the bargain.
So that's why the public space is the public caretakers of the space. So the corporation of the city of Windsor includes the police, but something, to use your example, if you observe the trash dumped in the alley, yes, that would be something more public works to address. But if you observe amidst that pile of trash, a criminal act or behavior or risky, threatening behavior, the police should be called. Then what we do try to tell our people is, okay, look, the physical circumstance that caused that activity, that act to happen may have been exacerbated and enhanced by the fact there was all this garbage and all this other thing. So we're trying to tell our officers, you know, follow up in your report should make reference that public works needs to be called and come out. And we do that. Mm-hmm. Problem is, you know, we don't do it as consistent as we should, because it's a training case. We're constantly trying to tell our people. So to answer your question, we are trying to educate our own employees. We have 681 employees that was police here. So absolutely. Yeah. So, but it's important because unless the weak link in the chain is the example you just described. So everybody's doing a great job, but there's that one. We're still, it takes everybody down unless we address the one or two things that, okay, until we get all the little pieces done. That's why even the small things matter, not just the big stuff. Yeah.
I'm gonna take this one step further. I think what my fellow owners said, we just have a lack of police presence in the alley. It's not about the garbage. It's not about the people. It's about the responsibility. If I sit there and I see a police officer standing there in a cruiser, that will cause me 99% less to commit any kind of a crime. And if I'm a female walking through that alley at 2:30 in the morning, I would feel 100% safer to walk through that alley and just to provide the safety factor of having somebody in that alley would eliminate so much of our problems.
I agree with you. So you can bet I'm going to bring these kind of comments back to my workplace.
The person I see doing 100%. The most positive work back there is Jerry, who is a an employee of the parking garage, and he's out there de-escalating things endlessly with addicts and homeless. And I'm not trying to point fingers at these people that are marginalized or going through what they're going through, but there's, and I know it's also not your fault. It's just there's a lot of issues that I feel like are not on the business owners right now. That they're all doing our best. They've already invested their money.
You're right, and I appreciate you saying, I know it's not yours, well, it is. I'm a representative of public service delivery organization, the Windsor Police Service. So when I hear this, it's paramount on me to bring this back to say, hey, look, here's an area where our operationally deployed staff in this geographical area of the city. I went to an event where stakeholders and property owners said this is a concern of theirs that impacts their well-being, comfort, their customers, etc. What can we do differently? I'm not going to say what the patrol superintendent is.
Yeah.
But the suggestion we could brainstorm some ideas. Can we not at lineup say, hey, you 16 officers are going to be deployed in this area over the next 12 hours. As part of everything, when you're not engaged in a call, we want you to start stepping up your frequency of going down alleys, for example. So things like that. And if you see stuff that looks out of place, you don't observe any criminal activity, but you see a whole bunch of garbage pile, make note of it and let's get the city to come and clean it up.
Well, I know that we had that in place in the late 90s and 2000s. I spoke with former, still current officers that were involved in these. I forget what they called them. Those street units that essentially just walked around and communicated and dealt with people and patrons. And I also know it was considerably busier when 10,000 Americans were coming over every weekend, and it might not be in the budget, but there needs to be something worked out there.
But what needs to be in the budget is needs prioritization. So we're never going to have a time where we have unlimited resource. That's never happened in history. But it's about, okay, but now it's not 1993, it's 2024. Here are the current things that concern property owners and residents and employees of our downtown. These 5 things. What can we do on our end to please? Public Works, what can you do to work with us? Social services, what can you do? Like that's the approach we got to do. Okay.
And I'll jump in quickly, just because I can see that it's a question that's been coming up frequently in the last few minutes. As many of you know, certainly in the hospitality sector, we've been working on this downtown revitalization plan. You will see something coming to council within the next 30 days that addresses everything you're asking for today. Can I guarantee that it's going to happen? That's going to be to the will of council, right? Because it's council that'll make that decision. Because as everything, there's a number attached to everything. But what I can tell you without going into detail, that what you're discussing today, you'll be hearing answers, solutions to very shortly.
Good.
And the only thing I can stress is that when that does happen, if it's something that you feel that you agree with, contact your counselor and say, hey, I need this, right? Because
It's very frustrating to come down to City Hall and listen to the police tell me how to set up my business to be safe. When I look outside and I just see craziness, and they're not doing anything about it.
One more thing, Hudson. I understand what you're saying, because his business barely has any problems. He's getting the drift of the Olet business where I see it all the time. 2 people have a problem to say, let's go to the alley and deal with it.
Yeah.
So they get the trash of what's going on. Like I said, if we can only have presence where this doesn't become an option of no view, right? So if I know there's a police officer there, I'm not gonna say, hey, let's go fight in the alley, or hey, this is gonna happen. I mean, honestly, it's all about presence.
The idea is not to have the fight at all, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but like I said, stay tuned, because within the next short period of time, the answers to your questions will be made public. So that I can promise you guys, right? We've been working on it now for at least 4 months. And like I said, it's at the point where the eyes are getting dotted and the T's are getting crossed, and there'll be public information very soon.
This is the kind of dialogue we like. I don't mind uncomfortable.
Oh, for sure.
This is good. This is exactly the intention of having this kind of thing. So I appreciate these points you're making.
We're just trying to get a solution for
Absolutely,
everybody's safety. That's literally what it is.
I don't want to take too much time. I've got 3 more slides. I'll quickly rip through these. Sandra, if you just, a lot of times, in a perfect world, we want people to be as involved as possible, tell us in a timely manner, report things to the police, all that, but we understand that doesn't always fit with everybody. So purpose of the slide is to you don't have to sacrifice putting up with it and all that other stuff. The other mechanism is use Crime Stoppers, call Crime Stoppers. You can give us just as much detail, just as much information without having to be involved in any way you feel it's going to come back on you. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. I think it's a good program. Crime Stop's been around for a long time. We get a lot of stuff done that route where we wouldn't have otherwise had we not given that opportunity for a member of the public to report things in that manner. Next slide. This is something we did a design charrette. So for those who don't know, a design charrette is just where a bunch of people that have a common stake in a building or a piece of property come together and just roll up their sleeves and brainstorm ideas of how to make changes that make that building, that space better, function better. So we did it for Sunlight Variety in the Glengarry neighborhood a number of years ago, and small little independent variety store. And we recommended a whole bunch of things. The purpose of just showing this is that it got a lot of people that had a common interest in that property talking at the same time, instead of just independent of one another, and then getting the ideas put on paper and some things that the property owner really could embrace. So I'm not sure something like that couldn't be something we could do for a vacant piece of space downtown, somebody's existing space, someone that just bought something, but they want to change it, but they want to make sure they get the most out of it for the value for their own investment, plus for the community, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just something that a cool little tool, technique that designers use to get the most out of a space. And then last slide. When you apply crime prevention through environmental design, you're taking some imagination, you're tapping into some expertise, you're tapping into experience by different people that are involved in an area. You're adding some motivation to actually press the go button and do it. You take the calculated risk. So you've done all the research, you've used people that have some expertise, you've taken some experience. You're not just blindly diving into something. You're saying, I think we should do these 5 things here to address this safety concern that's there. And then you actually go forward and put the throttle down and take action. When you do that, you usually get creative solutions that are sustainable, that last. If you just jump at the first thing, that probably won't work. You have to understand the uniqueness, the complexity of the situation. It may be more unique and complex than you know, or it might not be. It might be something that's very, very simple, but you won't know until you have the right conversations. And if you're just stuck in a reactive mode all the time, you smother creativity and you're constantly just going after the fact of stuff. You never actually prevent and get ahead of it. So that's it.
Thank you very much. That was awesome. That was awesome.
Really good question.
Thank you. Last but not least, I introduced to her. As many of you know her, she's been around for a long time. She also has a very long history in the hospitality industry as well as
I do.
where she's transitioned to. Go ahead.
Come and sit over here. And hi, people I know, people I don't know. There's not a lot of time. You guys had a lot of good information.
Just make sure the camera can see.
Oh my
There's a lot of
gosh,
people watching.
I know, but I need to be connected
I
to
know.
the people. My voice, you can hear my voice. So there is one, I mean, I can tell you about myself if you don't know me. My first job was at Red Lobster in Barrie, way back when you didn't even need a resume, you just walked in, right? You could smoke in restaurants, it was fun, I loved it, but, yeah, so that was a long time ago. I've bartended, I was at Villains for a long time. I'm still now at Smoke and Spice 1 night a week because I love it. So I know the hospitality industry, I love it. It's in my blood, right? So I have that experience, but I also, I was a teacher. I started and ran the Windsor Youth Center on Wyandotte Street for almost 10 years. And there was an open door there, right? With people, and it was literally an open door. Britt used to work for me, Britt. And so that's a similar kind of situation, a little bit different. The first gentleman said that, you know, when you're thinking about who to admit to your premises and who not to, the question is, well, what's going to happen if I let this person in, right? When I was at the Windsor Youth Center, there's another question. What's going to happen if I don't let this person in, right? So that's a different question. And now, for those of you who are working downtown, who you're human, you do have a heart, and I'm sure there's a part of you, maybe some days you don't feel it, but I'm sure there's a part of you that does feel for people. And you don't want to be, right? You don't want to hurt somebody. You don't want to be the reason that maybe somebody freezes at night. You don't want that. I get it. I get it. But for those of you that are a private business, it's your business that you're responsible for, not those people on the street. As a human being, that's your own decision to make for yourselves, right? So, and I say that having worked on both sides, right? You raised a really good question about when does your own personal safety override, yeah, personal decision. And we all make these personal decisions, and we all live with the consequences. So since the youth center, I left vowing I would never, ever, ever work in not-for-profit again, because it comes with its own difficulties. And then I thought, you know what? I'm just gonna waitress full-time. I love it. This is what I love. And I did, and then bam, the pandemic hit. And then like every restaurant in the whole world shut down. I'm like, well, so anyway, I retrained with this amazing doctor, Gabor Mate. If you don't know of him, look him up. If you guys are all working downtown, Gabor Mate, M-A-T-E. He worked on Vancouver's east side for many, many, many years. And what he offers is some good information. But that said, I have a burning question. And my curiosity is, what has brought you all here today? Because you've all dedicated 2 hours of your valuable time. You know, you've dedicated 2 hours of your valuable attention. So I'm curious, what has brought you here? And anyone?
Safety of the city,
Okay,
the progression of our businesses, obviously,
yes.
and how we can make the city better and have it more feasible for everybody to sit in and bring in more people downtown.
Okay, beautiful. Yes. Anyone else? Yeah. Whose safety are you talking
Of
about?
our staff, like of our employees. that-
Yeah. Do you mind if I ask where you're working or where
Tree
you're?
Hills.
Sorry?
Tree Hills.
Oh, okay. Are you the one of the
Yes.
owners? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Hi. Okay, so safety of
Yeah,
your
so we work
staff.
till 2 a.m. So some of our staff, like, you know, we have young university
Yep.
students
Yep.
working, so just making sure that they're safe.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. Anyone else want to offer why they're, yeah.
We're coming at this from the downtown mission.
Yeah.
So it's more of a service industry, of course. And we're here to learn about any concerns in the community that we're not already aware of necessarily. Most of course, that we are aware of. But also we're looking at it as directors at mission of keeping the people that we serve safe, but also our staff.
Yep.
And our volunteers.
Yep.
Yep. Are we doing everything we're to do to make that happen? You know, the DD warned comments that commented on earlier, mentioned earlier. I wonder how much of that we do, and I ask that question.
Great.
So yeah, that's why we're here, and always wanting to interact and serve our community members as well, because we are a community, right? So we're all needed to do better for.
Okay, beautiful. So thank you, all of you. Yeah, so safety is a big concern. And I just have one more question. So what's the problem? You wouldn't come here if there wasn't a problem. You just do what you need to do to be safe.
Well, employees walking to their car is a huge problem.
What's the problem with that?
Just being approached, not feeling safe,
Okay,
and
so not a safe environment.
not a
So what's
safe.
the problem of that for you?
The problem is when my staff walk to their car, they feel unsafe late at night. Like I said, in the dark alleys.
Can I ask you
Sure.
a further question? How is that a problem for you?
Because without my staff, I can't operate. If my staff don't feel safe, then I'm gonna work with them.
Right.
And that's how.
Perfect, right? So this is a valuable, not only are these fellow human beings that you care about,
Yes.
but they're a valuable resource. You're investing your life, your money, your time, your energy into your business, right? You need to make sure that you and your staff are safe. They're human beings, but they're also a resource. Fabulous. Anyone else want to say what's the big problem? Yeah.
The big problem is like we obviously all care. Like we're here, we give a shit about what's happening and like what's going on with our whether it's your staff, our clients, your businesses, whatever it is, like we care. So I think it's like communicating is like what the real issue is and getting to the root of the problem.
That what was that?
Like getting to the root of the problem, like what it is. We also like we just care. That's a big thing.
What's the root of the problem?
I don't know.
Ooh, anyone know what the root of the problem is? What's that?
I am here because de-escalation,
Yes.
that was my word.
Yeah.
And I thought, when I have somebody in the store waiting for the police for 4 hours to come and de-escalate, what do I do? When I have somebody losing their mind through the store and it's 4 hours of me calling over and over
To
again
get someone to come.
to get
less than
someone to come.
300 meters.
And a store full of people and, you know, it's not their, like, it's their safety too, so not everyone's gonna jump. Now, mind you, there are people that do, but then you go, oh my God, don't do that, because you think something's gonna happen to them too. And then there's everybody behind the counter and de-escalation.
Yeah. So someone is causing a
Well,
ruckus.
this was just one incident. This is
Yep.
just One.
So you have many. So what I'm
yeah.
hearing though, and maybe this is what I've been hearing over the last hour and a bit, is that there's problems happening. And yet the solutions seem to be out of your hands.
A lot of the times, yeah.
Does that hit the chord?
Well, the thing is.
Whoa. Can I pause you for a moment there?
Sure.
Okay. You guys are struggling with stuff that's serious, right? Like this is serious stuff. This is people's safety, people's livelihood, people's comfort. And yet the solution you feel is out of your hands. Yeah? How does that feel?
Helpless.
Yes, exactly. And what emotions do you feel when you feel helpless? Anyway.
Frustration.
Yeah. Anger. Yeah. Beautiful. There may be fear too, right? Yeah. Okay. This is where I can offer you 2 words, maybe 3, depending. Your nervous system. Nervous system. There's been a lot of talk about safety here, but I'll tell you something. You know what it is that determines whether we experience safety or not? Our nervous system. And it's like a little radar. It's acting all the time, even when we're asleep. And here's why it's so important. If we, first of all, safety and our perception of our safety does not depend on the absence of danger. It depends on our nervous system detecting safety. Our nervous system has to detect safety. So what does that mean? That means that anyone have panic attack. You don't have to tell me, just answer in your mind if you want. The panic attack and you're looking around, you're like, well, there's nothing wrong, right? Like everything's okay. And yet my heart's beating, like I'm sweating or whatever, or I'm just all of a sudden nervous, or I'm all of a sudden pissed right off. Like my staff's pissing me off and you're just like, ah, right? So you're either in a panic, you're in an anger, okay? For some reason, your nervous system is not detecting safety. It looks like everything's okay. So here's the thing. Our nervous system gets cues of safety from 3 things. One is the environment. You ever walk into a room right away, you're like, oh, good. And that's what these gentlemen are talking about too, right? Creating a safe environment. Number 2 is another person. You ever been around someone and they're just like so agitated? Well, yeah, you guys work downtown and you just like immediately, you're like, your own back goes up, right? And you're like, But the third place that our nervous system is detecting safety or danger from is our own internal self, our own thoughts, our own emotions, and how our body is feeling. How's that land so far? Make sense? You ever feeling okay and then you remember something and it's like a bad thing And all of a sudden now you're just like, oh, right? Yeah. Or you're doing okay, and then all of a sudden you get a letter from CRA and you know what I'm talking about? Right. Okay. So safety, right? Safety has to do with our nervous system. Now, here's the thing. When we're feeling angry or afraid or ashamed, our whole body goes into fight or flight. You guys ever experienced fight or flight? You live it every day. I believe that. Yeah. Some people grow up in fight or flight, depending on what their families are like. Past fight or flight, if you can't fight and you can't run away, but you're still scared and angry, there's a shutdown. You pass out, or you're just dissociated, or you're not there, or whatever. The other state of our nervous system is safety. Here's the key. What do you think is the only state of our nervous system in which we can successfully interact with other people, in which we can learn, and which we can grow? We got fight or flight, shutdown, or safety. What's the only one when we can act rationally? Want to guess? Well, I'll tell you, it's safety. If we're in fight or flight mode, our literal physiology, our body starts shutting down. Immune system, digestive system, and most importantly, the part of our brain that depends on language and rational thinking. So here's what I'm getting at. When I was at the youth center, you know, the most important thing to me was, what was that? Yeah, but not necessarily for the people coming to the center. Safety for my staff. If my staff didn't feel safe, if they came to work, they didn't like each other, or if they came to work, they thought I was an asshole, then you want to know what? Now they're not in safety mode. Now they're in fight or flight. Now they're pissed off. Now they don't trust that I'm going to be okay with their decisions. And now they're not making good decisions. Why? Because their body is shutting them. And that's just a fact. Okay? So safety. So when our staff feels safe, they will make better decisions. So what I'm seeing here is everyone in this room has an investment in making sure their staff is safe. Otherwise, I don't think you'd be here. So you're already on the right track. You're already on the right track. The only thing we need to know now is, what is a definition of safety? If it's not the absence of danger, safety is the presence of connection. Anybody have kids? Okay. If your kids wake up in the middle of the night and they have a nightmare, what do you think will make them feel safer? If you go into their room and give them a hug, or if you just yell from the living room, everything's okay, don't worry about it. Thank you. Nothing else has changed except now that you have a connection with you. Okay? My dog is so scared of floors, she won't walk on a floor. Now, if I put my hand on her back, now she'll walk on the floor. Connection. So, are we going to have enough mental health facilities to deal with all the problems out there? Are we going to be able to do something to lower the cost of rent? Are we going to even be able to get the cops, to come to us within 4 hours? I don't know. I don't know. But as long as we are depending on all of those external things to change so that we're okay, whose hands are we putting our okayness in? Somebody else's, right? And that will always make us feel pissed off, scared, whatever else comes up, right? So, all of you here, there's got to be 15, 20 people here. what do you have within your control? What do you have right now in this moment?
Sure actions,
What's that?
just your own actions.
And what are your actions right now? What are you doing right at this?
We are expressing our word to get help.
Beautiful. How does it feel to be able to express to your city councillor and a representative of the Windsor Police your problems?
Feels better.
Okay. Yeah.
It feels like a broken record
Thank you. Yeah. Tell me why you don't mind.
because I've been doing this since I opened. I've always cared. I don't just care about my staff. They're number one. I care about every patron that walks through my bar as well. And when I see crazy stuff happening outside, it, like you say, I go into a panic attack and like, oh my God, I hope they don't see that. Please, nobody leave right now. I don't want you to deal with this.
Thank you very much for being honest. Yeah. That resonates for me because when I was at the youth center, I felt like it was a broken record. I was asking anyone to pay attention to the difficulties that were going on. This is your business. I'm assuming because you're downtown, you're staying downtown, that you also care about our cities downtown.
Oh, 100%. That's why I'm here.
If you were, willing to, I would ask you, well, what do you have within your means right now that you can control?
That I can control?
Yeah.
I can control the inside of my own space.
Great. Okay, beautiful. Is there anything else in this moment that you?
Right now, I'm trying to control my temper.
Okay, well, because I also kind of do this like trauma aware focus. I'm like, bring it on. Like, I'm okay with your temper. I'm okay.
No, not here right now personally, but like my frustration with just what I can't control.
Yeah. How before today have you all expressed your frustration, your anger,
We have no dining room because of everything going on.
Now, how do you actually do this? How does this expression work? Like, do you call Ronaldo and be like, dude?
Oh, we've been very
Okay.
communicative. But it's just like I run the downtown Tim Hortons at Park and Goy.
Yeah.
If anybody's been there in the last month,
Yeah.
I don't have a dining area.
Yeah.
And it's
Which means they
moved to my other location. So they've
What's
seen
the other location?
Crawford and Wyandotte and Brewston University.
Okay, yeah.
So everything that I've dealt with in the last years,
Yeah.
now unfortunately these guys are dealing with because I've closed it to see the culture change.
Right.
To see as much as it's positive, there's so much negative towards it. I don't want to have an empty dining room.
Right. No.
I love seeing my guests come in that are regulars
Yeah.
and those good guests that we have, they're changing their culture and going somewhere else. And sometimes it might not be one of our other locations in the downtown core.
Yeah.
You know.
And maybe it's nowhere. Maybe they're just sitting all at
Exactly.
home now. Yeah.
And we have an owner that's very compassionate to the homeless and to everything. She does everything above and beyond. And she's getting to her point of breaking and not being compassionate anymore.
Okay. So what makes this situation different from other times that you've expressed your experience? And I don't know what your answer is going to be.
Because you're frustrated.
But
You're
what
getting
makes
to your
this,
break-
what
Because
makes
you're
this,
at your breaking point.
This helps us.
It's helpless.
Yeah.
Like, I'm also a manager, like a security guard. Sometimes I feel like. I'm the
Bouncers, police
I'm a
officers,
bouncer.
psychologist, psychiatrist.
Yeah, and I'm the maintenance person who cleans up. If I tell you, you can't use my washroom because you've done
Go outside.
negative things in my washroom, you go outside and use the facility outside. Now I have to clean it up.
Yeah.
So there's so many negatives to say no to doing things.
so here's my question. When have you all been able to, in a room with other people with similar problems, been able to express yourself?
This is the first
That was the first time.
Okay. So this is different than previously.
Mhm.
Can I ask, what does it feel like to hear other people say, validating your experience?
I feel like we're all on the same page.
Great. I wonder if there are other people working downtown who would also be on board.
There'll be a lot of people, tons of people, even the people that are rehabilitating your market. the things that have been done to that building in the last 2 months is insane. It's absolutely insane. He shouldn't go through black because.
It's like the broken windows, that's unreal. There's so much broken windows that happen. And you know, I know he said you shouldn't have a broken window, but the cost of a broken window could be your weekly wage for everything. Like, it's expensive for a broken window, that everybody says.
Yeah, because your deductible for a business is sometimes not
You
worth
can only
it.
use it so many times.
Exactly.
Yeah, we have 3 right now.
So
There's just, yeah, 2 to 3 months for his pay.
I want to reiterate something because this also goes for all of you. Because you're all human beings, right? Any human being who is experiencing that frustration, that anger, all those emotions can be motivating because they give us energy, but they can also limit us because our rational mind is shutting down. So we don't necessarily see the options and possibilities available to us. And this isn't to blame. This is just to let you in on what's going on in your body. So if possible, I definitely recommend finding ways to help yourselves establish a sense of safety and control in yourself so that you always are thinking about your options and possibilities that are available to you. Because you're all here, you're all resourceful, you're all resilient, you're all creative, and you're all dedicated. And you're all willing to come together. So I know that within this group, there are solutions. That's not even an issue. There are solutions. I don't know what they are, but there are solutions. And the more each of you takes care of yourselves, and I don't know what that's going to mean. I don't know what that's going to entail. Only you guys will know what you need to take care of yourselves. When you're taking care of yourselves, those options, those possibilities will start to become available to you. You know that for a fact, and it sounds easy to say, but it's true. Yeah.
Tamara, I mean, this is a huge, complex issue.
Yeah.
But, and I feel your pain, because we experience it daily. And I don't know if this is a solution or if it just impacts better communication, but we have staff that would be more than happy to come down, just talk to your staff. Doesn't have to be for long. Just, this is what we know about some of what you're dealing with, mental health and addiction. I always think understanding is key to us as human beings. It might never solve some of the problems, but when we feel we have a sense of why this individual is acting this way, how they have their capacity to reason is totally not there. It makes us feel better, at least in our industry, where we are service industry. That's the only reason we can stay and do what we do every day. We're putting it out there to you. If you would like one of our staff who are in the front line daily, they might have some keys that say, this is how I cope.
And not even that, like sometimes it's the same problematic people, which we all know who they are. This is the same people. I might have a good rapport with them and I might be able to like communicate with them like, hey guys, just bounce from this place for like give me a little bit of a break, go somewhere else for a week, come to the mission. If I don't mind coming by, I'm not a captain of any fixing of problems, but I'll stop in and like 100% like try my best. So that's the best good thing would work. For my team, like my team has great rapport with a lot of clients that are probably breaking your rents windows and going to the washroom on your properties and doing things you guys don't like. So like any help that the mission can be, like I know it feels like sometimes we are part of that problem, but I want to be part of the solution as well. So like let me know what thing that we can do.
So here's if you guys don't mind where I jump in quickly. Here's where the disconnect is, and this is something that I'm working. The business operator, and I'll put my hand up, I did it for forever. The problem is that we have, as operators, 7,000 things we're trying to do to make sure that our business operates properly. And the offer is kind as is, and that's fantastic. Our problem is we don't see these problems at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right? We see these problems at 11:45, 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, when our patrons are there, right? We don't have that connection at that time.
Well, we're not saying we do outreach for you.
Yeah.
All we're saying is we'll go there and talk to your staff. And that's what we are offering today. We want to be good neighbors. That's
Gotcha.
our expertise.
Gotcha.
We'll share what our wisdom about the population that is causing your issues.
And what works for us
Yeah.
in terms of, I think you mentioned de-escalation, for example, right? So what works for us in our setting? I mean, today we had quite a lot going on and there was a lot of de-escalation needed and excellent you mentioned and stuff like that, but Britt and her team, they managed to do it somehow, right? We don't always, as Barry's been to it, was at our location months ago, I think it was, and you know, with CPTED, we're also one of those people that we also have open windows, things like that. And for us too, yes, it costs money, so we have to wait until we have donations, so we can get those windows fixed, right? So we struggle with a lot of the same situations, unfortunately, that a lot of you as business owners and other people in different industries in our downtown core do. But we also have the additional piece of like trying to be a place where people go where they don't have it. Right? So we want you all to know we are open 24 hours a day at the Mission at 875 Olet. We're Judy Center, which Tamara, of course, started all those years ago, and Brittany worked at as well years ago. That is open every evening as well for young people. So when you have people that are coming to you, if you're able to communicate with them, send them to us.
And I'm not saying like we're outraged, the cops may take a long time to get there. If you ever want to call the mission or my next cell phone, I have no problem giving it out. I'll pop by if it's midday. If there is someone downtown in Maiden Lane, positive disturbance, like, hey, maybe I know them. I'm not an outreach worker, so don't expect a lot. I'll come by and do my best. Like, at least I can try and help out. I know it sucks for you guys, right? I know it's a lot of our clients that are causing these issues, and I feel for you guys.
Honestly, it's most of the time, I work security downtown for a short period of time. It's these guys have nowhere to go after you guys stop accepting people in. That's when the problems start to happen. I think it's the 8 o'clock cutoff you guys have.
It is typically right now with winter, we're 24 hours
Yeah.
and no cutoff at all.
And usually, sorry, from my experience in the summer, it used to be 8 o'clock. And I drove around downtown for hours and hours. And that's when I find people in alleys, and I find people on the Blumenboro
So 8
patio.
o'clock is the day program, the 8
Yeah.
PM is when the shelter opens, so it's still 24 hours all year round.
No, I'm just saying, like, that's what I noticed, is like,
We don't
when
stop.
they couldn't go, is where they slept out because of problem.
Accepting people, just so you're aware.
No, sorry, I just don't know, I just
Yeah, I
don't
know,
know
that's
from
what
what I
you
expect.
said, like, our shelter opens at 8 o'clock, 8 PM,
Mhm.
but our day program is open from 8 AM to 8
Okay.
PM. So people can come 24 hours a day, and we opened up our warming center as well, right, and for December 1st. As the Salvation Army, they just recently opened up their warming center, welcome center there in mid-December at night. So, and the Housing and Homelessness have the H4 on Wyandotte Street, they also opened up warming center for nights as well now.
But that's good to know, because from the summer when I knew, there was nowhere for them to go.
The warming centers don't exist, but the
Exactly.
mission is still 24 hours. So the shelter is open from 8 PM to 8 AM.
We didn't know that. Now I know.
Guys, I gotta jump in quick. We gotta wrap this up soon. Just two things before from me. I don't know if Tamara wants to take any questions or finish up, she can. Like I said, a lot of your concerns, the conversations will be happening over the next few weeks. As soon as we're done with the budget, it's the next big thing coming to the table, and hopefully everyone had a chance to fill out the survey, and I'm sure everybody here probably did. But there's gonna be conversations starting when it comes to more help downtown. Whether it's just from a police perspective, from agency perspective, it's hours. There's so many things that are being worked on right now that are being discussed in this room that are gonna be discussed further in the next few weeks, where we're gonna need more input. So that for sure will be another conversation, maybe even the next conversation, once that report hits our desks. And once it hits mine, I promise it'll hit yours. As far as the septic stuff from Barry, I will definitely post that to my social media, because that's a really good tool that he brought up today for people to see. And then I'll leave it to Tamara to close it up. For any questions or if you want for chat.
I'll say thank you to all of you. And the one thing that I like about that offer that I noticed is that, well, you're offering to create some connections, right? And I'll tell you, it makes a real difference if you guys can say to somebody, hey, go see Britt at the Mission. Well, now that person already knows that you know Brittany, right? So the more interpersonal relationships that happen, the safer we are. I'm not saying that's going to solve all your problems at all, not. But really creating these ties, really creating these relationships and establishing those relationships is going to really be helpful, you know. You can take this advice or not, honestly. Sometimes I think maybe it might feel like, oh, great, this is now one more list on my to-do list, right? Like I got too much to do already. But you said that this was the first time you've gotten together to express your frustration as a group, right? So now that this has happened, you've already created a little change in your own lives. See what comes of this. I don't know what it will be, but I know that there will be some kind of change because you've already acted a little bit different. And I will also make an offer before we go and close that if anybody ever wants to get together as a group and have another just discussion about what's going on for you guys, I'm very happy to just offer my time because I love hospitality. I love downtown. And yeah, and I'm impressed that you guys came out here. So thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. If anybody wants to ask me something, I'll be here for a little while before I gotta run. And again, thank you for coming. Thank you.